Please don't scroll, just give me a minute. Is your wife a person? It probably sounds like a dumb question. If you're a woman who feels like the Bible has been weaponized against you or women as a whole, if you've witnessed the Bible being weaponized as a misogynistic, patriarchal, blunt object, whether you're a believer in the Bible or atheist or agnostic, or you hate the Bible, and if you're a woman or a man who calls yourself Christian, who identifies with red pill theology, I have a link below, a conservative evangelical man preaching on who is my neighbor. You're not going to disagree with anything he says. He's not liberal. I would ask you to consider listening because it's a great sermon. Just do that if you don't want to listen to a woman talk because you don't think I have the right to. For all who are still listening, is your wife your neighbor that Jesus speaks to numerous times, defining the greatest commandment? Genesis established her person status with the Imago Dei. It says God created them in his image and likeness, male and female. That's already established. Does she have neighbor status? And the next question, does she lose her person or neighbor status when she marries you? If so, where does it say that in the scriptures, that she loses person or neighbor status? Before arguing, listen to the sermon, defining who your neighbor is. Probably the best sermon I've heard on the Samaritan. As Christians, we believe the scriptures are God-breathed. In other words, written by people, but that God inspired those writers. He chose that time, that place, that person, that audience for a reason. That's why people go to seminary who have the luxury of devoting that kind of time, why we learn languages and study that time and place and language. We believe that God did it on purpose. The truth and meaning of the word could not be fully conveyed any other way. Understanding meaning by understanding context, studying context is something historians do when studying other texts that are not the Bible. We do something similar. Christians can do that on their own without going to seminary. One thing I also want to mention about Greek and Hebrew that is not true in English. Greek and Hebrew are two languages that have gender. Everything in the language is gendered. It's even easier to understand what was intended. Or if you're reading a text in English, there's no indication whether the I, you, or they is masculine or feminine. But Hebrew and Greek, the languages that the scriptures were written in, do have gender. You can tell who the author was speaking to. The only exception is sometimes masculine, plural, second person, or third person will include women as well, but not always. If you look at the context, you can use logic to determine. For example, if it's all women, it's going to be feminine. But if it was a mixed crowd that was spoken to in the verse before that, and there's a masculine plural, it might be a mixed crowd, for example. But you can generally figure it out. It's not very ambiguous. In English, it's ambiguous. That's one good reason why we study the scriptures in their original languages. One good reason God chose those languages rather than English to inspire the word. It's clear what he's trying to say. One thing that's interesting is that all of the scriptures on adultery, every single one is addressing men. Second person and third person masculine singular is often used. In fact, you find the words husband or wife or woman in those scriptures. You can find that in English. If you look at the commandment, it's addressing men. And if you look at Jesus's doubling and tripling down on the commandment about adultery, where he says, if you even look at another woman lustfully, you have committed adultery in your heart. He's speaking to men, doubling down, making it even more strict. And he uses the word woman. In the original commandment, the word wife is used. Obviously, that is talking to husband. And that's not because it's okay for a wife to commit adultery, because there are scriptures about what happens when a wife does it. But what it's telling you is something about the culture. Men were the ones primarily doing this. If you go to Numbers, you'll see how God says we should deal with a woman committing adultery. If you read it out of context, it looks like he's doing something terrible. She will pray to be cursed and have her womb not produce. What's interesting about these scriptures about what to do with a woman who commits adultery is how progressive they were. First of all, the man's word was not that important to God. In fact, he says the man is jealous. That's what prompts the discussion. Instead of allowing the husband to decide what to do, which is what secular culture promoted, God says she will go to the priest and be brought before me. Her word, her oath, is part of the process. Instead of allowing the husband to make decisions about what to do, which would align with the idea that the husband has total authority over the wife, God says no to that. Guess what the alternative was for women who committed adultery in secular culture? If you look at Egyptian culture, which was contemporaneous, Egyptian secular culture said that the husband gets to decide what to do. He could forgive her. It's all up to the husband. The Israelite law says no. God says in the scripture that she will be brought to a priest. She will be asked if this happened. She will swear an oath. There will be prayer inviting some sort of curse to happen where she won't be able to bear children if she's lying. God will contend with her with the facilitation of the intermediary, which is the priest, which was incredibly protective of the woman. First of all, it valued her oath. Second of all, it interrupted jealous, crazy husband from just his wife. God said no to that, which men do still today, frankly, feel entitled to do. It's happening all the time. Thirdly, in those scriptures, you can even read it in the English translation, every time it brings it up, it says, if a man is jealous and she cheated, or if a man is jealous and she did not cheat, this is what we will do. He says it several times. You can go look it up yourself. In other words, the possibility that the man has a jealousy problem and the woman didn't do anything wrong is baked into those scriptures, even in the translation. If you Google this and take the AI overview, it distorts it and twists it upside down. We have a culture now that wants to bear witness against God with these scriptures, but if you dig in and learn about the culture and read carefully, you realize this was very protective of women at a time when no secular culture, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, none of these secular texts were protective of women. Women were property and chattel. They were demoted by marriage, not promoted. Which brings me to another point about scriptures around marriage and how a woman was to be treated and valued by her husband. Ephesians, the most telling line about how a man is supposed to treat his wife that demonstrates promotion from person status to something higher. It says he should love his wife like Christ loved the church and sacrifice himself for her. Let's think about how countercultural the idea of sacrificing yourself for your wife would have been thousands of years ago. If you look at Egyptian texts, there's nothing like that in there, that's for sure. How did Christ lay down his life for the church? Have you seen those movies? I can't even get through them. It's gross. He suffered, he was beaten horribly. How is it possible as a Christian man to read about marriage and come up with red pill? It's not. Listen to Haddon Robinson's sermon. It's not about who your neighbor is. The thing you need to hear is what he says at the end, how it relates to who you are. If we truly are conservative evangelical Christians who read the Bible with great reverence, there's no way you can miss this other than being blinded by your own selfishness, which is the explanation for the entire red pill movement. Misogyny and patriarchy couldn't be further from God's message, starting in Genesis all the way to Revelation, about how a man is to relate to a woman, not just in marriage, but everywhere in this world. Is your wife a person, your neighbor, or is she elevated higher in God's eyes in terms of how you treat her? My second question is someone else's wife your neighbor? Thirdly, my final question for you fellas, are all women in the world who are being raped and unalived and so-called modern feminists that you can't stand, are those women neighbors as defined by the Great Commandment or not? Your answer matters. Christian is countercultural. Patriarchy and misogyny are not countercultural. If you want to be a patriarch, join secular culture where that's been acceptable for thousands of years. Join the culture with your red pill theology, but don't call yourself a Christian. Nothing could be further from the scriptures you claim to revere. You're not a Bible-believing Christian if you ascribe to that. And ladies, I said it was for you, and then I talked to the men. Hopefully you got something out of that too. It was for everybody, including me.